When I went to start filming this video, I was like, let me make a list of all the books that I read in the month of November. And the list got longer and longer and longer. And then I said, I did not drink enough water for the amount of talking that I'm gonna have to do in this video. So just bear with me, guys. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. And today we're gonna talk about all of the books that I read in the month of November, which feels like it was a very long month. One of the books that I read this month is going to be It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, and I have actually already mentioned my opinions and in-depth thought on this book in my recent reads video for romance books, so you guys can go check that out. Click the link in the cards above and you can hear everything I have to say about that. But overall, I gave that book a 5 out of 5 stars. Very hard-hitting, very tragic, but I really enjoyed the writing. Next book I read was Ice by Karen Marie Moning. I gave this book 1 star and it was awful. It's really bad. This is the one book in the Fever series where we don't follow Mac at all. We have to follow Danny. Danny is a younger girl from the first 5 books that is kind of like a little sister to Mac, but something happens or Mac discovers this secret about Danny and it pretty much tears them apart. And so Danny is kind of like in this world, post-apocalyptic world, where everything's gone to crap and the only people that she could kind of depend on are no longer there for her, and she is being pined over by more than one grown man in this book, and it's honestly very cringing and awkward because they're sexually attracted to her. And it occurs through multiple times in the books where it feels like grooming because these are men. One of the characters has been watching Danny since she was a child, and Danny had no idea that this person has known about her for that long, but it honestly felt like a grooming situation, and Karen Marie Moning was putting them in this plot line to make them a romantic item in the future. So it was really just honestly disgusting. Then we have another character who something's happening to him and he's actually becoming a fae prince of like the Unseelie High Court, and the more he turns he becomes very primitive and like primal in nature, and he has this like aggressive sexual attraction to Danny and like this need to feel obsessive over her, and that was just very uncomfortable as well. I did read also book 7 where we go back to Mac, and that is called Burned, and in Burned, Danny, the same character who was 14 in Iced, she goes through the Hall of All Days and she comes out an adult. Even though I know that Karen always planned to age up Danny, like I read in her blog that she was always gonna go through the Hall of All Days and grow up by 5 or 6 years, and if you know that reading book 6, which is Ice, you can see the foreshadowing for how she was setting up Danny to age up. But even knowing that you were going to age up a character, I feel like making her a romantic option for men who are more than twice her age while she's still young was a very weird choice, and honestly it made me very uncomfortable. I did not enjoy that book at all. But and then I feel like there was justifications because in the actual book there's a character who's like, oh well, in a different time you would have already been a wife and a mother already, and it's like, okay, but you didn't write this book in that time. You wrote this book in modern day America, so like even using that as a justification for why you chose to write this storyline is very weird. The storyline started developing earlier than her age, and so that book was horrible. I gave it 1 star, and I was very happy to be back with Mac in book 7 and picking up where we left off and not really having to deal with Danny for a little bit. And honestly, when she goes through the Hall of All Days and comes back out, she's a very different person entirely. And so on top, like even besides how uncomfortable I felt in book 6, she was very much a child. She was very immature, and while I do understand that she was realistic to her character, I did not enjoy following a kid. It was just very weird because I felt like she was a child, she was immature, she was petty, she was naive. It was just all around annoying to have to get the story from Danny's POV. So when she comes back out of the Hall of All Days, she's a very drastically different person, and I enjoyed the shift. I don't know if any of the potential suitors from book 6 will actually be a thing. I don't know if she continues to explore that. I haven't looked up any spoilers, of course, but that's a thing. And then I also read Gleam, which is book 3 in the Guild series, which is called the Plated Prisoner series. This was the best book out of the entire series so far. If you don't know what this book is about, we are following this character by the name of Orin. She is Gold Touch, and she is the favorite saddle of or concubine for King Midas. King Midas is a king in one of the 6 kingdoms in this world, and everything he touches turns to gold. Every single ruler of one of the 6 kingdoms actually has a magical ability. You have to have a magical ability to take the throne. And so throughout these books, we follow as King Midas tries to conquer other kingdoms, and basically he's making political schemes and war so that he can be like the sole ruler of the 6 kingdoms. And he needs Orin by his side in order for him to do that. But she is someone who has, again, been in a cage for the last 10 years, and she's starting to question whether or not King Midas actually cares about her, if he deserves any of the loyalty that she's given to him, and also if she can break free and branch out on her own. Now, this is a fantasy romance, so there is another king who is a love interest for Orin in this series. And what I really enjoy is that we have been following Orin for the past 2 books, and we know how much a stronghold that King Midas has over Orin, and I felt like we were always set up for her to kind of break free from him in this book. I expected that going in, but even knowing that this was going to be the book where Orin broke all the chains around her, I feel like Raven Kennedy did such a good job of like really pushing it home how much King Midas controls her, even outside of the cage, how much he knows her emotionally, how much he knows her and like has a mental hold on her, and what he's willing to do to keep his hold over her. And also like would Orin, even though she has this second option, which is this other king that she's interested in, but is she going to go from one savior to another? Is she ever going to stand on her own? Is she going to cling from one guy to the next? I feel like Raven Kennedy did such a good job exploring that, and I was thoroughly satisfied with the journey, even though I knew from where we were what the end point was always going to be, which is going to be her breaking free or trying to break free of the chains that was put on her. But this is the thickest book out of all of the 3 that have been put out so far, and the work that she put into this book truly shows. I'm very satisfied with where Orin is, very proud of her, but also very nervous, and I don't know what's going to happen next, and I cannot wait to get my hands on book 4. Read Night Pleasures, which is the actual first book in the Dark Hunter series, and I enjoyed not so much the romance but all of the actual characters that we're going to get to follow throughout all of the books. I did not care for the particular romance in this book. I wasn't exactly sold on it, but I enjoyed meeting all the other characters that we're going to get to follow in the future, especially Acheron and Styx. It was just pretty interesting to follow, but I think I gave this one 2 out of 5 stars. It's not bad, it's an okay book, but for me personally, the biggest chunk of this book was about the romance, and I was really just trying to like pay attention to everything that was going on in the background and all of the side characters, because I didn't really care about the romance itself. And then with Night Embrace, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. This one I actually did like the romance for, but we explored the multiverse so much more, and so I feel like it was a perfect balance between here's this romance and like stuff is happening between these 2 characters, but also let me introduce you to all the other characters that are going to play a really big part in the entire multiverse that she's building in like the Dark Hunter, Wild Hunter world. I've also come to accept that I'm not going to really care for every romance that are in these books. Honestly, like I know it's a fantasy romance or a paranormal romance, but like I actually just want the background stuff. Like, can you just give me the tea within the multiverse? I don't really need the entire romance plot. So the next books that I read were also mentioned in a vlog that I posted earlier this month. The first one is going to be a Spindle Splintered. I'm having such a hard time saying that name. This is a novella by Alex E. Harrow, which is also the author who wrote The 10,000 Doors of January and Once Upon a Future Witches. Once Future something with witches. Okay, this was a retelling for Sleeping Beauty and is actually book 1 in what is going to be a novella series of retellings. I think the next one is like a Snow White or like a Cinderella retelling I've seen that are scheduled to come out. But in this book, we have this main character who, the book is so forgettable, I can't even remember her name right now, but she was born with this rare disease that basically no one ever survives past the age of 21 or 22. No one ever makes it to the age of 22 with. And so on her 21st birthday, she has this party that's thrown for her by one of her friends, and she has always kind of loved the idea of Sleeping Beauty. Not loved the idea of Sleeping Beauty, I feel like that's the wrong way to describe it, but because Sleeping Beauty basically sleeps through the entire like climax of her story, and she hits a certain age where she like is cursed to go to sleep forever, the main character in this book can kind of relate to that. And so her friend throws her a Sleeping Beauty themed party, and there's actually a spindle at the party, and she pricks her finger for fun, and she is transported into this world where there's like multiple Sleeping Beauty-esque characters, and they all try to break free and actually live through the climax of their story. And this had so much potential for me, especially because once she pricks her finger, it kind of becomes a portal fantasy, but it was so much more like pop culture related. And for me, I haven't read anything from Alex E. Harrow before, but I've heard really good things about how like fantastical and whimsical her writing can be. And so when I saw that she was writing retellings of fantasy and like whimsical stories, I was really excited because I'm like, okay, this is the perfect place to start. And so I was kind of disappointed when I found out that it was so much like pop culture heavy references. And yeah, and I also feel like the fantastical element, even like with the pop culture being added, I feel like the fantastical elements really fell short in terms of like the portal fantasy, because there is the Wayward Children series, and that is a portal fantasy as well, and they're literally transported into an entirely different world that's flipped on its head and very different from where they actually started. In this one, it just kind of felt like she went back to like medieval times, and there is a little bit of like magic in the story, but it was not done to what I was expecting or like what I actually would have really enjoyed. And so I gave this one 2 out of 5 stars. Next book I read is Payback's a Witch, and I enjoyed this. I feel like it's gonna be very forgettable, but I enjoyed it when I read it. I feel like it's a perfect read for what it is. It was a spooky romance during like, I think it came out like a few weeks after Halloween, or like maybe 1 or 2 weeks after Halloween. But yeah, it was definitely a book that I had my eye on to read during like the spooky season. And this one was a fun time. We have this character who comes back home after being gone for a long time, and she's a witch, and she has to do this competition for her family where she is the arbitrator for, and she's basically the one that has to make sure that the competition goes fairly. And there is this ex-boyfriend who pretty much, something happened in the past where he pretty much broke her heart, and she comes back and finds out that he has broken the heart of multiple women, and they all want revenge. And so this is kind of like a John Tucker Must Die with witches involved, and our main character actually has a very sexual attraction to one of the other women who's trying to get revenge on this character as well. And they all have to participate in the contest that our main character has to be the judge for, to make sure that it happens fairly. But they team up and kind of come up with this idea that they're going to make his life a living hell and try to embarrass him during the competition, and also maybe possibly get him to lose if they can. And again, there is a romance between our 2 characters. I enjoy the storyline of our main character, her coming home after being gone for such a long time and having to deal with the people that she turned her back on, and being home but not really being home, and like this is a place where you're from but you're not exactly comfortable because it's kind of strange to you at the same time. And I also enjoyed the romance. I feel like the obstacles that they had to overcome felt very realistic, because her love interest is someone who actually really enjoys being at home and have no really interest in leaving, and that's like where she's from, is where she wants to stay, it's where she wants to raise her kids and live her life. And then we have our main character that's just like, this guy broke my heart and I wanted to run away from home when I was younger and went off to college, but I actually enjoyed the life that I've made for myself, and I don't know if I want to come back to this small town because now I live in like a bigger city. There is again action in this story because there is that witch trials competition where they're actually trying to get revenge on this douchebag ex-boyfriend. And also she discovers so much about her family that she didn't learn because she took off and left for so many years and hasn't been really back to visit and hasn't been in touch with her family. And so I feel like this book, for the short amount of time that you're in it, because it is a very short book, it offers up a lot. And while I don't think it's a book that I'm going to reread, it is a book that I would recommend, especially during the spooky season where you're trying to read like a Halloween romance. I highly recommend Payback's a Witch. The next one is going to be briefly mentioned because I DNF'd it on page 8, and that is going to be A Court of Honey and Ash, A Court of Ash and Honey. I don't have the book in front of me. I took it back to the store. It was returned. I bought something else that was a 5-star read. And yeah, this book is about this girl who is a half human, half fae, and she has to compete in this competition in order for her to gain acceptance among her fae heritage. And yeah, I did not vibe with the writing in this book, and I was more so like upset that I paid $18 for it when I feel like it should have been free on Kindle Unlimited, if we're being honest with each other. The next one was also a DNF, and that is going to be Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. I also unhauled this book recently, but it is actually pretty hard to describe, but in short, we have this war that occurred in this world, and this empire or like government rose from the ashes of that war, and they pretty much rule with like tyranny. And one day this brother and sister, a worker of the government, comes and he actually tests the sister and realizes that she is like useful, I guess has like magical abilities, and they end up taking the sister. The brother tries to fight off this soldier, like warrior for this government, and he ends up being hurt and almost crippled really, and he vows to get revenge and like to find his sister. And so the sister, then we jump into the future where he is kind of like this thief heistman and he's like a badass fighter, and then we have the sister who's also like a fighter, and she goes around slaying these monsters that it was kind of hard to follow. Honestly, the book is pretty convoluted now that I think about it, and while I did really enjoy the descriptive fighting scenes, it became pretty much a chore to read because the author has created this really dense and tangled world, and he uses his own vocabulary, and so there's a really thick dictionary in the back of the book, and I found myself having to go to the back of the book to understand what I was reading, and then he uses his words to define his words, and it just like became me looking at one word and then looking up another word, and then, you know, reading the background. It's like, okay, I haven't gotten to that part of the book yet, so I guess it's not going to make any sense until I read more. But then I'm reading the book and I'm not really understanding what I'm reading because I'm not getting clarity. The only thing that felt very clear was the actual fighting scenes. I will say it's pretty action-packed and I did enjoy that, but everything else just, it was too tangled and it became a chore, and I was not that invested. And I read 250 pages of the book, and the plot I could tell was going in a different direction from what I hoped it would, and I just was like, yeah, no, I can see now that I feel like this is going to be a 2-star read, and I'm gonna have to work to even get those 2 stars. And I felt like maybe I wanted to switch to audio, but then I realized that the only reason I would switch to audio is just to actually finish this book, and I'm like, why do I feel the need to finish it? Like, why am I chugging through something that I don't really care for? And I'm gonna use an Audible credit just to say I read it? No. So we DNF'd that book. Then we have For Tuna Sworn, which was actually pretty interesting. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars if I remember correctly. We have this character by the name of For Tuna Sworn. Her brother goes missing and she doesn't have her parents. Her mom and her dad were murdered, and she is like a nightmare. And so anytime she touches someone, she can discover their deepest, darkest like fears, and she can create hallucinations and imagery to make them actually think that they're living their worst nightmare. And she's determined to find her brother, and so this fae approaches her and basically says, if you marry me, I will take you to your brother. And she's like, okay, because that just makes a lot of sense. So she marries him, and then she discovers that he is the king of the Unseelie Court. I'm not exactly sure. I think he's the king of the Unseelie Court, if I remember correctly. And then she discovers that her brother has been like kind of enslaved by another fae, and she enters these trials to compete for the Unseelie Court throne, because just because she married the king, that doesn't make her the queen. She has to complete these trials and win and basically become the queen, and she decides to do that in an effort to free her brother. It was a standard fantasy romance book. It is not bad at all, and I could see people really enjoying the book, but it's not the best that I read. I feel like if this was one of the first fantasy romance books I've ever read, I would really enjoy it. And also, if you're someone who didn't really like A Court of Thorns and Roses, I feel like this book did a lot of the trial aspects way better. But again, I've seen better, and I don't think that I'm going to continue with the series, but I do understand people really enjoying it, because I mean, I still give it a 3 out of 5, which is not a bad rating. Then we have Theft of Swords and Rise of Empire. I gave both of these books 5 stars. These are a new favorite for me. I have a vlog of me reading them up on my channel. You guys can check that out as well, where you get to see my reactions to everything. But basically in these books, we have these 2 characters that we're following mainly by the name of Hadrian and Royce. And Hadrian and Royce are kind of like these thief mercenaries that for hire. And they go around doing whatever they can really to make money. And they're pretty good at their job. They're not the smartest, but they're very humorous. And they have a really cool platonic bromance between them that I actually love. And they're hired for a job to steal a sword, and they don't think anything of it. Except for when they go to steal the sword has actually been used to kill a king, and they are framed for the actual murder of the king. And after trying to exonerate themselves, they have to steal the new king, which is like the prince turned king, and take him to see this 1,000-year-old wizard. And then they discover that one thing is leading to another, and there's an entire conspiracy to take over not just the kingdom of Melangar where they're from, but all of the kingdom, and unite them under one power, which would basically be ruled by the church, by putting this heir to Navrin on the throne. And Navrin is like the heir to a god, one of the deities in this world. There are dwarves, there are elves, there are humans. There's a lot going on in these books. Each book is a volume, and it has 2 separate books in there. And I think that helps the book become so action-packed, because technically each individual installment is only 350 pages, and so much takes off and happens and like wraps up so short. But every time you jump into a new book, you get little pieces of the entire plot, but you get to follow Hadrian and Royce as they go through different things and different missions, and like the banter between them is just so precious to me. I love them so much, and I'm so excited to read all of the books that Michael J. Sullivan has put out, because he is an instant favorite author for me. I even have Nolan, which is the latest series that he has out, which is kind of like a sequel where we follow the descendants from the Rhaenyra Revelations, which is what we're reading right now with Thefts of Swords and Rise of the Empire. So yeah, these are a new favorite for me. I love them so much. Then I read A Fate of Wrath and Flame, which was a fun time. I love this book so much. We are following this character by the name of Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra is approached one day by this lady who's basically begging her to save her husband by doing something for Malachi, and she talks to Rhaenyra as if she's supposed to know who Malachi is, but Rhaenyra doesn't, and she doesn't really have a choice but to try to help this woman. But except when she goes to help her, the woman actually stabs her in the chest with a horn, and she is transported into this entire like fantastical world that is filled with very dangerous and deadly elves. And in this elven world, she finds out that she also existed, or a previous version of her existed, and that version just killed the king and queen and tried to assassinate the entire royal line. And she was actually betrothed to the prince, who is now the king, but except she just killed his parents. And so she's immediately thrown into a dungeon, and she's doing everything she can to survive and to figure out how to free this lady's husband so that she can make her way back home. And it's just so much happening in this book. It is kind of like a forgiveness or like second chance romance. I don't know if that really counts, because the version that the king was, or the version that she was when the prince fell in love with her, is actually not her. That version of her is completely dead. And so while he had this mangled sense of like feelings towards her because he loved her, he was gonna marry her, then she tried to kill him and killed his mother and father, and now she can't remember anything, or she's claiming not to remember anything, because I mean Rhaenyra didn't really do it because she wasn't there. And also she's acting entirely different. So everyone's just confused and conflicted about what's going on, and there are bigger hands at play. There are gods in this book. Malachi himself is actually a god, and each of these guys have like their own kind of like war they have going on with each other, and they're using these characters as pawns, and everybody's using everybody. Everybody's manipulating everybody. It was an instant fantasy romance favorite for me, and I cannot wait for book 2 to come out next year. Like between A Fate of Wrath and Flame and Guild, I am eating, honey. I'm having the time of my life. 2 more books. So the second to last book that I read is going to be The Blade itself. This was a very interesting read because it was very gory in detail. I enjoyed the brutality, and I actually find the characters very interesting, except nothing actually happened in this book. And so I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 just because we only established characters, but we got no type of really world building, no real explanations, no character development, no plot, and there was no map in the book. And it was just a very difficult reading experience. I was pretty much annoyed the whole way through. And there's no synopsis on the back of this book, and no plot actually happened in this book, so I can't even tell you what it's about. We are following about 5 or 6 characters, and there is this war brewing between kingdoms, but that's all that I can tell you right now. I'm hoping that when I read before they are hanged, the plot will make more sense, or not even make more sense, but like the plot will reveal itself, because it is hiding right now. It's hiding. And then the last book that I read was Unsold by Will White, and this is the first book in the Cradle series. The first half of this book was really info dumpy, very choppy. The writing was very not good, if I'm gonna be honest with you. This book follows a character by the name of Lyndon, and Lyndon lives in this sacred valley that is basically like hidden or like in between 4 mountains. And within the sacred valley, there are 3 clans, and everyone born within these clans have the ability to use Madra, which is like channeling their spirit into like the essence and the aura of the world and using it to do different things. It's very anime-esque, except Lyndon was born kind of like, they labeled him as Unsold because his Madra ability is pretty much non-existent, and so he grows up as like ostracized social pariah within the clans, and everyone pretty much looks down on him. And the clans are very adamant about like power and strength and using their Madra to assert dominance. And so because Lyndon can't do that, he has a very tough upbringing and no one really believes in him, not even his family. And while living in a world where all you have to lose is your honor, Lyndon doesn't have any honor because he was born without it. So he's willing to do whatever he can to squeak out a win here and there. And so he's pretty much like, he honestly reminded me of Barrow from Jade Legacy, because he's very like sneaky and conniving, and to him a win is a win no matter if you did it honorably or not, no matter if you followed all the rules and didn't cheat or not. It doesn't matter, you just win at any way that you can. While things are occurring in this book, Lyndon actually discovers that his sacred valley is doomed one day to be destructed, and he's determined to be the one to save it, except he can't actually grow and get more powerful within the sacred valley because they refuse to teach him how to really use his Madra because he is an Unsold. And the book pretty much ends with him having to leave the sacred valley and to go off into like more dangerous parts of the world and like explore stuff to gain strength because he's pretty much limited and there is a very low glass ceiling within the sacred valley. There are currently, I believe, 9 or 10 books out, and it is planned to be 12 books. There was a drastic shift between the first part of the book and the second, and in the second part of the book, it just like the first part of the book feels very tangled and like foggy, and then at some point at like the 48% mark it just like became clear and like I could finally understand everything that was happening. But because like 50% of the book is such a huge chunk for things to be like intertwined with each other and like clunky and dense and really making no sense, I gave this book a 2 out of 5. I feel like if the writing in the second half of the book had been consistent throughout the whole book, I would have given it a 3 or a 4. But yeah, the first part of the book was just too bad to overlook. I am going to be continuing with the books. I think that Lyndon is a very interesting character because I don't know if I actually want to root for him, because again, the way that he wins is not by any means honorable, and he does not necessarily care. And I found myself when he like had to deal with the consequences of being like sneaky and like conniving, like satisfied, because like you can't get through life by cheating. And so like when he actually had to deal with consequences, I was just like, yeah, like you can't keep escaping the consequences of your actions. And that might just be me as like a mother or like a person who believes in like accountability, but it was still interesting enough for me to follow. I don't always have to like my main characters, but I do want them to be complex, and Lyndon is definitely one of those more complex characters. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of November, and I'm looking forward to packing in as many books in the month of December as possible. But I am someone who's trying to get totally prepared for grad school, and I'm trying to start classes the first week of January, and time is literally ticking down. So I am a mad woman running around for the holiday season between all the stuff I have going on in my personal life, all of the reading and filming and YouTube content that I want to put out, and also trying to get set up for January's classes. So keep me in your thoughts and, you know, send me positive vibes, and I will see you guys in my next video.